Heyo everybody, Haku here with the Tower of God video that I've been planning to do for a long time. So it's a confusing thing for some people that are new to the series sometimes to figure out why different people call the characters by different names or things like that. So recently I made a video talking about how the translations, and specifically name translation, that line the official sort of webtoons like host is using, the official translation has been being updated and being changed. And I sort of went more into the background detail in that video. But just really quick, originally there was a fan translation by the company, then the line translation took over officially, got rid of all the company translation, pretty much anywhere you can find it on the internet, pretty much. And started doing their own translation, and a lot of people didn't like it because, I mean, let's face it, it was worse in a lot of ways. But they've been going back through and changing and updating a lot of things. So I went through, and this is just one man's research, so I could be off on some things. There could be some mistakes. But I split it apart into when the characters were introduced just to not spoil certain people if they don't want to go past a certain point. But I went through and found all the translation differences in the entire series, including the recent fixes that I could find. So I'm going to go over them here. I'm going to have them all up on screen, and I'll scroll through them as I'm going, just so that you can visually see them too. I think that'd be a lot easier than just me explaining things, but I'll give some backstory to the changes and stuff too, as much as I can, which changes I like more, which changes I think are more correct, and things like that. So just to start out, just to get into this, the original company translation for the main character's name at the beginning is 25th, all spelled out, Bomb, B-A-A-M, and the line translation changed it to 25th Bomb with just one A. Now, I prefer keeping the two A's because it helps with pronunciation. I see a lot of people call the character Bam when Bomb is kind of a more right translation. I told this story again in the recent translation change video that I actually happened to meet a Korean person named Bam when I was like back in high school. And he described to pronounce his name, he's like somewhere between sort of Bam, which is like a really long A, and Bum. So just sort of like Bum rather than Bam, obviously. So that's why I prefer the two A's. I just think it explains the pronunciation a lot better, but either way, it doesn't really matter. For the second character, the company, the original translation was Kun, K-O-O-N, Agaro Agnes, and you will catch me in my videos and stuff. I still say Agaro all the time, even though it should be Aguero. I'm pretty certain it is meant to be Aguero, but I say Agaro so often. And they also, when line translated it, they changed the I in Agnes to an E. That doesn't really make a difference. Again, the name translation really isn't that much of a difference here. I tried to leave out most that were just small differences, unless they were important characters, though. Next up, the company started translating the name in the first like 8 or so chapters as Lahel, but then they started using Rachel, and of course I feel like almost all of us in the community pronounce it Rachel, even though it should be Rahel or Rahel, like they say in the anime even. But yeah, the spelling Rachel has stuck. With the line translation, they always used that. But there are still some people who I've seen use Lahel. But yeah, Rahel should be the name, but most of us just pronounce it Rachel, kind of incorrectly. The next two were like the most common two I see confusion and argument over. Zahard rather than Jihad. It was originally Zahard, but line uses Jihad. Personally, I don't think there's that much of a difference. Like, phonetically, it'd be like Zahado. So it's like, whether you want to use the J, whether you want to have the R in there or not, it doesn't really matter that much. I prefer Zahard. I think it sounds better. I think even if it was Z-A-H-A-D, I just prefer the Z over the J when it comes to the translation. But when Siu has written this out in Roman letters, Siu has spelled it Zahard. So that's another reason why I kind of keep saying Zahard, mostly just because I prefer it over Jihad, but also because Siu himself has spelled it that way. But yeah, I don't think it matters. If you use Jihad, I don't think it's a big deal. Same thing with Andrasi or Endorsi. The way the pronunciation is, you could kind of go either way. The company originally translated as Andrasi, so you'll see a lot of that in the fandom. But Endorsi is the newer line translation. And they've stuck with that even when updating things, like they've stuck with Jihad. They haven't changed either of those back. Now, this is a funny situation where Siu has actually written out Andrasi's name in Roman letters and has spelled it Andorthy, so Andorthy. And I've seen a lot of people who have like spelled her name as Anne space Dorothy, and honestly, that could be what Siu means here. He could actually mean Anne Dorothy, and like both translations were kind of wrong. So whether you want to say Andrasi, Endorsi, or Anne Dorothy, I think any of the three are fine. Also, it's a funny story I don't remember if it was an interview, like a Q&A sort of thing, or if it was in a blog post, but Siu was actually mentioned that her real name isn't actually Andrasi/Endorsi, that sometimes when people come into the tower, you're allowed to pick a pseudonym to climb under, and Andrasi's one of those situations where eventually we'll get her real name revealed, but we don't actually know her real name yet. Next is just a slight spelling difference, a knock with one A versus two A's. It doesn't matter either way. I just threw it in because she's an important character. Next, originally, it was translated as Shiplisu, but when Line did the official translation, they changed it to Shibisu, and sometimes they separate it into Shib-Isu, especially Kunagaru Agnes calls him Isu pretty often, which I think makes more sense to have it split. Shibisu I actually kind of prefer over Shiplisu. I think it sounds better, but from what I understand, again, of Korean translation, Isu is fine, Yisu is fine if you want to have sort of the Y-ish sound at the beginning, or Lisu is also fine. It could be Yi, E, or Li. Just depending on sort of the way I don't know, like even in Korean, there are people with like the same character in their name, but some of them read it as Yi, E, or Li, is the way I understand it. So Lisu, Yisu, or Isu could all be fine, but I like it separated because I get the feeling that Isu or Yisu is a surname. The one translation that I am like most adamant about, it was originally Hatsu. Line translated it to Hats with H-A-T-Z. I can't stand that translation. I really wish they would go back to Hatsu. Hats, just to me, I mentioned it in the other video, seems like the plural of hats, but like with a Z, like it's some like 90s marketing thing. I hate it. I hate the hats with a Z translation. I really want them to go back to Hatsu. Especially because, again, Siu has mentioned in blog posts that there are fans who have mentioned to him in Korean that he's a very anime-ish type character and has a very anime-ish name. And of course, Hatsu is a very Japanese-sounding name. So to me, that just like adds more into the sort of fact that I think it should be Hatsu. Next is Funsakal Lere from the company's translation, who was originally translated in the first few chapters as Ponsakal Lero, sort of 3 words. They used a 2-word surname, but they changed that after the first few chapters and have even gone back and fixed it and just changed it again to the same Funsakal spelling. But they've stuck with the sort of Lero spelling, or I see a lot of people pronounce it Lero, but if we're getting into the real, like, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? The real phonetics of the way his name should be pronounced, in the Korean, it's more like Laure or Laure. So again, Laure without the O is fine, or that, it shouldn't really be Lero, it should be Laure or Laure. And it should have sort of the A or E at the end of the sound. But again, I even don't do that. I always say Lere. I always go Lere when it should be Laure. Then next is it's mostly a spelling difference. They didn't really change too much of the actual name. The original Alexei Amigo Chaz versus a different spelling, Alexei Amigo Chars. I prefer the original. I just feel like that version of Alexei seems more like Eastern European. It feels more like a real name. So I just prefer the original translation for this one. The next is an interesting one. Akryung versus Ghost. I'm not sure why, of all names, they I'm assuming Akryung just means ghost, and that's why they changed the translation to ghost. But it's strange to me that they translated his name out. I prefer Akryung. It's sort of like a Nekomamushi Inuarashi from One Piece situation, where I don't like that the official translation, for some reason, we don't translate other characters' names, because it would be weird. It's like, oh, Nami means wave. Why don't we call her Wave rather than Nami? Like, it doesn't make sense, see? So I don't get why they translate Nekomamushi and Inuarashi to cat, or what is it, Cat Viper and Dogstorm. In the same way I don't get changing Akryung to Ghost, but it is what it is. I mean, you could argue the Japanese translation in the anime do that by changing Bomb to Yoru. So it's kind of the same thing there. But yeah, that's Akryung slash Ghost. Ho and Ho is just a spelling difference. I don't even know why I added that one. Same with Serena Rinen versus Serena Linen. I prefer the Rinen, but it doesn't really matter either way. Next is a common change you'll see. Sunwoo Nare is changed to Nare Sun or Shunwoo. And again, it's like how I always say Yeon, but it really should more be pronounced like Yon. A lot of the things that were translated with U's in the original The Company translation, they changed to EO. So it should still be pronounced sort of like Seonwoo or Sunwoo, either way. It's just a spelling difference. Same with Chunhwa rather than Chonhwa. It's just a spelling difference. I kind of prefer the original because it's what I'm used to, but it doesn't really matter either way. Blarus versus Blarouge. The actual sort of spelling is like Brarouge. And it again has that j sound at the end that could be a z sound or could be a j sound depending on the way you want to do it. So Blarouge or Blarouge, either way works. I don't really have a preference. I actually kind of prefer the line Blarouge, but it doesn't really matter. Next one is another spelling difference that doesn't really matter. Edrock was how it was in The Company. Line changed it to Edrock with a CH, but then they went back and edited that and changed it to how it was originally spelled. Now, Edrock with a CH, I don't think really matters that much. If anything, I kind of like the way it looks spelled with the CH. The problem, though, is that it caused a lot of people to say Edroch or Edroach when it should just be Edrock. So again, that's just a slight spelling difference that I guess I prefer the Edrock with a K spelling just because, like with Bomb, it lets you know the pronunciation a bit better. Same with Kurodan versus Kurdan. It's, again, just whether you want to have the U silent at the end of that R when you translate it to English. It's not really much of a difference. I like Kurodan because I think it sounds cooler, but Kurdan really isn't much of a difference. Let me move this image a bit to do the rest of the Season 1 ones, just two more. The Company translated Kun's elder brother that we see in Season 1 as Hachuling, and line changed it to Hatzling. Now, I prefer Hachuling, not for the same reason that I hate the Hatsu versus Hats translation, though. The reason I prefer Hachuling to Hatzling, even though, again, phonetically, I don't think there's too much of a difference, really. I don't like that because a lot of people are like, oh, why is his name so similar to Hats or Hatsu? So again, that's why I don't like that. It's just too similar to Hatsu's line translation. That's why I prefer Hachuling, but it's not really a huge difference in this specific case. And then lastly for Season 1 is the irregular Phantominium, originally translated Phantominium with the A there. Now, I've seen it spelled a bunch, Phantominium, like the word phantom, but I think that could just be a common misspelling in the fandom. People could just be spelling it incorrectly. And Line changed it to Pentaminum. Don't know why. Don't really get that one. But, yeah, I prefer Phantominium to Pentaminum, definitely. And that's all of them from that. So let me move over to... Alright, I have it right here. Characters introduced, or names introduced, in Return of the Prince / Devil's Right Arm. So, the original The Company translation, again, there's just a slight spelling change. Juvial Grace with the YU compared to the UE in Juvial Grace with the line translation. Now, I prefer the YU just because with the Juvial Grace translation with the UE, a lot of people are like, oh, that must mean that it's French, and viol means something not really good in French, and it causes a lot of people to really look too far into the name, trying to make theories and stuff, when that's not at all what it's supposed to mean anyway. CU has already said that the name viol, or it should be viole really, but I've always said viol. I think it sounds better that way. But it's supposed to be based on the word violet, like the color violet. And I don't know, again, it could just be a thing with trying to turn words that aren't Korean into Korean letters, is maybe why he didn't put a hard T on the end of it. And he's just saying like violet instead of violet, but that's what the name viol is supposed to be about. So that's just the only reason I don't like that, is because it makes people think that it's supposed to be French when that's just reading too far into it, and that's not really what it's supposed to be. The company originally translated Ocraptor, and that had an R added in to make it Arcraptor, but then they went back and line changed it to Ocraptor. Again, it's a long ah sort of sound, so you could argue AH, you could argue AR, or you could argue just A. I prefer Ocraptor or Acraptor over Arcraptor, but again, it's just a difference in spelling based on a similar pronunciation, and it could go either way. Next up is Yiwa, and line changed that. Sorry, let me mess around with something. Iwa and or Yiwa, and line changed that to Iwa. Now they changed it back to Yiwa with the YE over just the E. I prefer, or the YI. I prefer the YI Yiwa, because again, the pronunciation should be more similar to Yiwa or Iwa, and I've seen a lot of people with that pronounce it as Awa or Ewa, and it should be, again, Iwa or Yiwa. So I think that the YI translation just sort of gives you a better idea of how it's supposed to be pronounced. Next is just Novik. They changed it to Novik, but then changed it back to Novik in the official translation. I prefer Novik. I just think it looks better. But again, it's just, it could be pronounced either way. So it's kind of pronounced the same, so it's just a difference in spelling. Same with, I always call her Jaja, but Shasha or Sia Sia, either way. I always say Shasha. And they originally, when Line took over for the official translation, spelled it with S's, but then they changed those S's to X's. And still, in some of the stuff that they haven't fixed yet, they use S's, but I prefer the X translation. I just, again, think it looks nicer. The company translated Dan with two N's for some reason, but then they changed it back to just Dan. Next, they had I've always pronounced it Quietro, and they used an O, and sometimes they didn't have a U in there, but then they went back through, and when they edited things, they changed it back to Quattro, which is what it was in the company translation. So again, that's why you'll see different ones for his name. Cheng Vlador in the company translation was changed to Cheng Blarode, and sometimes they spell Cheng Blarode R-O-A-D, so they even within lines spell it differently sometimes. But I didn't look up the actual Korean letter, so I'm not sure how it should be, but I think Blarode is better than Vlador, so I just stick with Blarode. Next is, again, a translation thing, whether you want to make the Z sound or the J sound. It's Yuge. I prefer the J sound for this one. I just think Yuge looks better than Yuze, which is what Line originally used. But then when they went back through and changed, they changed it to the company translation of Yuge. And the company translated the head of the Kun family as Kunedwan. Now, Line has spelled this a bunch of different ways in a bunch of different arcs. They've spelled it Edwan, Edon, Edhan, but in the earlier chapters it's Edwan. The chapters that they've already gone through and fixed, it's Edwan, so I think the ones that are in later arcs might be updated to be Edwan too. Next is Murchia, or again, another word I always pronounce wrong. I always say Merche, Grace Merche Lizlek, but it should be Murchia. And Line has spelled it with an I, they've spelled it with an E, and I don't know if they'll move to one consistently, but either way it's just Murchia. Next, Line has spelled Casino with one S, they've spelled it with two S's, they've spelled it with a K, and I have no idea what they're doing with that. I prefer the middle spelling. I prefer the C and the two S's, but either way, it's just Kasano. I don't know if they'll stick to one spelling eventually when they fix things or not. The company originally translated the character in the sort of first arc of season 2 as Rap Devil. Then when Line came out with the official translation, they changed it to Rob Devil, but with the recent changes to the translation, Line has changed it to Rap Devil to match the original fan translation. So now it's Rap Devil again. I prefer Rap Devil to Rob Devil, but either way it doesn't make much of a difference. And here's another one that has to do mostly with pronunciation again. The company translation of the name was Arlen. Line added an E to the end of it. It should still be pronounced Arlen. But you can't have the E. I think what would have been maybe better if they wanted to put an E at the end, put another N there, and then rather than Arlen, it makes me think more of Arlen. But either way, it should be pronounced Arlen. And the problem with it being changed and having an E added in the official translation is that a lot of people started calling the character Arlene, and it should be Arlen. So again, it's just another thing where without the E, it lets you know what the pronunciation is supposed to be a lot better. But the earlier chapters, like the Devil of the Right Hand arc, they've changed it back to Arlen, so I think later on in the series it'll probably be changed back to Arlen in future chapters too. Another difference is Line spells Emily with a Y, whereas the company spelled it with an E at the end. It doesn't really make a difference, it's Emily either way. I think the egg tank thing though, did that have Emily with an E on it? That might be why the company did it that way, and I don't know if Line changed that or not, or if it still has an E on the egg tank. So maybe it's supposed to be spelled with an E at the end, but either way it's just pronounced Emily. Doesn't really make a difference either way. Now for some characters introduced in Season 2 Workshop Battle, we have Yuto. Line translated it as U-T-O-H. Still Yuto, but it's like they spelled Utah but with an O instead of an A. And they've since gone back, and in the stuff that they fixed, they've changed it to Yuto with a Y. Again, I prefer that because it is less confusing to get the pronunciation wrong and say Uto rather than Yuto. So again, I think the Y is the better translation there. But that's pretty simple. Next one is one that there is some very good argument for it being changed to something else. The company originally translated the Mad Dog of Yama's name as Varagarv. Now, Line had no consistency with how they spelled it whatsoever. They did Baragov, Baragave, and either one with an H in there too, and they've since gone back, and in the earlier chapters, the ones they fixed, they've gone with Varagarv, the company translation of the name. When it comes to what Siu means by this name, there's an old school anime character, I think from Slayers, called Volgarv, or Vargarv. So again, without that second A there, so that could be what he means. It could be meant to be Vargarv, or maybe it's just something Siu came up with and it's supposed to be Vargarv. But a lot of people get this wrong, saying, oh, it should be the name Bagarov, and it should not. Because the R sound is definitely in front of the G sound with the Korean letters, but Baragov spelled, I think just Bargov, not Baragov, is an actual Indian surname, B-H-A-R-G-A-V, so that could be what Siu means. Siu could mean Bargov. But either way, I like the translation Varagarv, but if they wanted to change it, it's like the Joaquin situation. It's spelled H-O-A-Q-I-N, and we can assume that he means Joaquin, just even though it's technically Joaquin in the Korean letters, we can assume that he's trying to put the name Joaquin into Korean letters. So this might be another situation like that, where he's trying to make the name Bargov, and it's coming out as something that can be translated back to Varagarv. So yeah, either way. I like Varagarv though. I just like it because it's what I'm used to. Now, Adori was originally changed to Midori by Line, but I think that was just a mistake, because they fixed that to Adori, and I don't even have any clue where they got Midori from, so I think that was just a mistake on their part. I think it's just meant to be Adori. because I think they only got it wrong, like, at first, and then in later chapters they went back to Eidori, and now in the earlier chapters they fixed Midori to Eidori. So again, I think that it was just sort of a mistake in the earlier chapters. Next, Baylord Yama, who for some reason Line translated as Baylord Yama with an H at the end. And again, pronunciation-wise, Baylord Yama totally makes sense. There's not really much of a difference between Baylord Yama and Baylord Yama when it comes to the actual pronunciation, but it just feels like anyone who had been a fan of the series for a while, when they see that, they would know, oh, they mean Baylord Yama. So they've gone back and they've changed and fixed that to Baylord Yama. Next is, we only have a few left here, so pardon the just dark abyss at the bottom of the screen, but I want to move this up to where you can see it better. We have Ponsakal Iruro, whose name they translated that way, sort of like without the space, but kind of like how they originally translated Fonsakal Loray's name. So again, I think this could be just one of those things where they're going to end up changing it. They haven't fixed Name Hunt Station yet, so when they do, I think they're going to probably change that to Fonsakal, like with the Phonsekal, but I think they'll probably keep that spelling since they kept the O in Loray. So I guess this, similar to how Laure should be pronounced sort of like Laure, this should be Irure, I guess, or Iruroi. So again, the O is just sort of a transitional thing, and it should end on the A sound. Then the translation, or the company translation, translated Eurasia Enzahard as Eurasia N, but Line changed it to Eurasia Ann, which makes sense. I mean, maybe Ann is what Siu meant. They might change it. They haven't got to the arcs where she's mentioned a lot yet. I prefer N, though, just because it seems like more fantasy, more special. It's not just a plain normal name like Anne, whereas like Anne is just like a real world name. So that's why I prefer N, but it doesn't really matter either way. Next, Hendolok. Line has translated it as Hendolok for the most part, but in Name Hunt Station they actually used Hendrock rather than Hendolok, so I think that might get changed. I think Hendrock is just a mistake, that whoever was translating Name Hunt Station went with Hendrock instead of Hendolok, and they use Hendolok everywhere else, even in Line, so I think that's going to get changed. And lastly, the final one, introduced in Season 3, Line has translated Verdish as also Verdici, spelled with an H and without an H. I don't know if they'll settle on one. I think settling on Verdici, either spelling would be fine, but I personally prefer Verdish, because the weapon, the Bardish, looks like a larger version of the weapons she uses. So that could be where Siu gets the name from. It could be Verdici from some sort of soccer player named Verdici, because that's another place where Siu commonly gets names. But we know he just names characters after whatever. He named Hockney after a David Hockney art book that was lying around when he made the character. Venti Grande and Tall have very obvious connotations to their name. So yeah, I think he might have just meant to call her Bardish or Berdish. But if they want to make it Verdici, it may be supposed to be Verdici. I think it's fine either way. But yeah, this turned into a crazy 30-minute video, wow. But yeah, I had been planning to do this for a while, just to try to help out the community as best I can with these name translations, to help explain things so people would know better. You can share this video around, or like I said, I've already posted these two images that I've used. I posted them on Twitter, just look them up on my Twitter. A link to that will be in the description as usual, but just look them up there, and you can share them wherever. I don't care. You don't have to credit me or anything. That doesn't really matter to me. I just did this because I wanted to kind of help out the community, because I know some people get confused about it. So yeah, that's sort of all I got. Lastly though, oh yeah, I did put a note there. I didn't worry about name order, because name order changes have happened a lot, like Jinsung Ha versus Ha Jinsung, or Yu Han Sung versus Han Sung Yu. And the name order isn't even consistent within within line itself, so I didn't really feel like going through all that. I personally prefer surname first, or just do it the way that it is in the original Korean. Because in the original Korean, some of the characters have their surname first, like Ha Jin-sung, like Yu Han-sung, but some of them have their surname last, like Quant Blitz. So it's weird. It's different even in the original Korean. But yeah, that is it. Thank you for watching. Like if you did like the video, comment down there. Like I said, share this around if you want. Comment around your thoughts or anything. Subscribe for more. Tower of God, much more on the channel. Follow on Twitter if you want. If you want a link to the Discord server, ask and I'll give you one. And lastly, if you want to help support the channel on Patreon to help me keep making these videos, it's patreon.com/Haku of the Tubes, or a link will be in the description. But that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.